Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, Emily. How are you?
I'm good. If you don't care, could you just state your name for the record?
I am Gladys Faye Baker
Okay, and in what year were you born?
in 1943.
In 1943. Okay, I know that whenever you were born, World War II was going on, and it wasn't over until 1945. I understand that you were only a child, but did this have any effect on women's working conditions as a whole?
Not that I can think of. And the only thing that I know that the women, they worked in factories. They made the army uniforms for the soldiers. Part of them was made there in Russellville, Kentucky. My sister worked in the sewing factory there. Of course she wasn't, during that time, but the neighbors around, there was an older lady that I know, to Miss Bagley. She worked there, and her husband was in the army during that time. And to help her get by, she rented apartment. She took her house and divided it and made apartment for another lady's whose husband was in the army at that time. So they was there together, and they would walk back and forth to the sewing factory and work during that time. And she told me this when I was a child, and I would go over and sit and talk with her. Very nice woman. But her husband got killed during the war. So he didn't come back. So Mrs. Bagley, she never had any children. And she rented that apartment out to different people
Mm-hmm.
and kept on doing that for the rest of the time that I knowed her.
So, what did your mother and father do for a living?
My father, he had several different jobs. The first one that I can remember is he worked for the railroad. He was a brakeman, if I'm not mistaken, on the railroad for several years because that's what his father did. And he would be gone for several days at a time. My mother was a housewife, and she stayed at home with us children. There were 7 of us. And she she did the cooking and the washing and stuff for all of us, so that was a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
And Daddy, after he left the railroad, he became a construction worker. And we would move from one place to the other. The first place I remember we went was South Bend, Indiana. We stayed there for a few weeks while Dad was working. We just went to visit him.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, he got on at E-Town. He was working for Coleman Construction out of Huntington, West Virginia, and they built water plants and sewage disposal plants and laid water lines and things in different parts of the city. We got to stay mostly in E-Town because Dad worked. He would go from uh, up to Red Cliff and West Point and on in towards Louisville, doing work for Mr. Trainer there. And I was in school through the 5th grade there. And that was a pretty good time, for us to
Mm-hmm.
get to stay. And then when we left E-Town, we would have to travel different places all over Kentucky and stay. And we went to Moorhead, Kentucky. That's a familiar place for most people because Moorhead College is there.
Mm-hmm.
And we live right just a couple blocks over from Moorhead College. And I remember doing a school trip where we went to Moorhead College and run through all the rooms and things there that they had available for us to see as students. And then after that, we went to Covington, Kentucky and lived. And Dad decided instead of buying, just renting places, that we would buy a mobile home to live in. So we would have a place that all we'd had to do was just, get someone to move the trailer whenever we had to leave because we traveled that much. Sometimes I went maybe 6 months to school. That's what happened when we moved here to Columbia. I went 6 months at Hamilton High School in Covington, and then we transferred back to Adair County, and I finished out that that year, and then like 6 weeks of finishing out the next year at school, in high school, and we went to Russellville. And there I had to change schools, again. One school is different from other schools. Some has a higher standard that they are maybe like a grade ahead than what you go to another school.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't realize that. And like advancements, in that
Mm-hmm.
place. And it was pretty hard to try to catch up. If I come here, Columbia was a lot different than what Covington was. They was way ahead. They had already started the program where if you was going to be a secretary,
Mm-hmm.
or if you was going to be something else, you took whichever course you thought was going to be what you wanted to do in life. Now they're starting it here more, the new program that they set in.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, when I come here, they was a little bit behind,
Mm-hmm.
so it was easy for me here.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I went to Russellville to school, they was right back up. They was in a, higher advancement than what Columbia was.
Mm-hmm.
But now that, they were getting it everywhere, which is going to be good for people whenever they get there.
So you were having to move to different towns because of your father's job. Did your mom ever have any other job besides being a housewife?
No, Daddy didn't want her to work.
He didn't want her to work?
Uh-uh.
Do you know why that was?
He said she had enough to take care of us children, and he wanted us raised right.
Mm-hmm. So being a housewife, what did her duties consist of at the house?
Just making sure that we behaved ourselves. Oh, yeah, I guess that was my primary.
Was it so she did probably all the cooking, cleaning? You said that there was 7 of you all. Did you all help her any around the house?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she assigned us jobs to do. We had to do the dishes. And when I was in high school, I started cooking all the meals that we eat. And I had to plan them out, go to the grocery store and buy it, and come home and cook it. And then wash the dishes when it was over with. So, you don't, women didn't have the easy life that people think they do.
Mm-hmm.
Not back then, you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have a restaurant to go to on every corner.
At what age was your first job?
Let's see. I was 18. Might be not. Yeah, 18 years old.
And what did you do?
I went to Boyle Midway, and it's a manufacturing company in Chicago, Illinois, and I started on the assembly line. And one product most people might know of is starch. It used to be Easy Off starch, but of course they got different names for it now. And like your house sprays, and that little aerosol cans.
Mm-hmm.
I started on that, and the first job you do, you would there's a conveyor belt, and it's got a round, like a tub in it, and you would stick your fingers in the tops of the cans that you're going to put in, and you kept this conveyor belt full. And then it would go around, and it would shoot out a line, and as it went down the line, the different women would put the different products in it. the one thing that they call them straws was like your straw there. You would put it in, and it went down over top the cap of that can, and then the next person would put a little cap on top of it that you spray with.
Mm-hmm.
If I had a can of spray paint, I could show you
Mm-hmm.
how it worked. And then it went into a vacuum thing that put the gas in, and then it would come back down the line, and it would go where you packaged it. And if you was on that packaging end, you had to grab it real fast and put it in the containers, the boxes, to be shipped out. And each hour on that line, you changed jobs. You worked an hour on this job and an hour on that one. That made where you rotated your position each hour. And some of them was fast. Some of those cans run 90 a minute. Some run 120 a minute. And you learned to keep up with it. Don't, if it went through that chamber where they put the gas in there, that aerosol spray, oh, that guy would come out and you got it, believe you me. But it was fun. It was the first job I had. I liked it. It was just a sort of a seasonal job because they was running behind and they knew the holidays was coming up. So I worked, I guess, about 6 weeks there. And during that time, well, when you got called into a factory, they'd tell you it was just, so many weeks. And then I went to Jensen's Motors, where I worked, and they made these parts that went into a submarine.
How old were you whenever you went there?
I was probably 19, and we had these, what they call horns, that I worked on. You would have to dip them, and you burn them up in paint and stuff, and hang them up to dry. It was fun. Then after we dipped them, they would go into a chamber where they was dried, and then come back out, and somebody else done something. I never did have to work on that end, so I didn't know. And then that was a special order. That was for the Army. And after that, well, I got called to Proctor Silex. And I worked there for, I guess, a year and a half, 2 years. We made motors that went into ice cream freezers. And it was fun. They taped these, the motors was on wires, and they went into a machine that done the wiring on them. And then when they come back, they had little wires sticking up, and you would put on these black coil things that would go down like on a straw, would go down like on top of them. And you had to tape those down this way and that way that had the wires in it. And you had to do so many of those a day. And it was production work, piecework. You had to do so many. And my friend and I, Violet Spoons, well, we worked on that. And then Violet got where she could keep up with the number of that she's supposed to. So they asked me would I go into the boot and test them. And they had been through a shellacking when they come to me after the woman assembled them. Then I had to take a hammer and loosen them up. And then I had to test them to make sure they was working. And then put them in a crate box. And they would be waiting to get them. If I didn't have a whole box full, they come and got one that I had so many full, and they'd bring another one back. And as soon as I get them all fixed and everything, well, they'd take them and put them in those ice cream machines, and that they sell. And I did that, well, even plumb up until I was pregnant with your mother. And then I had to take a maternity leave with her.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted me to come back. So I went back and I went on second shift so that she could go stay with her daddy. And then she went to a babysitter's long enough for me to pick her up. Well, she wasn't very happy about it. So I worked about 2 weeks, I guess, like that. Or a week. I worked a week. And the babysitter, she couldn't do anything with her. So I had to quit. And so, anyway, I stayed off. I guess it was a year. And your daddy, Grandpa, he decided to move back to Kentucky. And when we did, I stayed home with her another year. But in the meantime, I started looking for another job. There was a sewing factory. Well, I didn't have the sewing factory experience because I had all assembly experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept looking around and looking around. And finally, I went and talked to a friend of mine, Dad's, and he said, I know a job that's just come available. I said, do you want it? And I said, well, yeah, I'll take anything, try it. If I can't do it, I can always quit. So he told me to go to Illinois Tube Works, Shapeproof, ITW. And so I went there, and I put the application in, and I was the first woman that was hired in that plant.
The first one?
The very first woman, yeah, that was hired in that plant. And anyway, when I got called to work, I know Mr. Russell, he worked there, and he come and talked to me, and my brother had put in for an application, and he asked me about him. So I recommended my brother for the job, so he got hired too. And I worked for Illinois Tube Works for 11 years.
11 years. So how long after you got hired as the first woman did they start hiring other females?
It was 1 year later. I stayed there a whole year, just me in the factory.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you some of the experiences I had. The men was real nice, and the pans of screws, well, with fasteners, you call them.
Mm-hmm.
I had a big table. I had to sort them. It was called a quality control job. And something happened. I don't know if it was in the material they got or if it was in the machine, because they run them 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they would get hot and they burn some of the screws that come through. Or one side would be a flaw in it. Or maybe they call them cracked heads. They'd have a little crack in the head. And different things like that. And I had to sort them by hand. So they would help me to throw the screws up on the table. Some was mixed with long ones, some with short ones, and that was my job, make sure I took out which one wasn't. So I was sitting back there one day, and I'd been going through the screws, and all of a sudden this guy come back, and he sat down. Well, I thought they'd hurt him,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say nothing to nobody. I thought, well, he's going to help me. He sat over there across from me, and we talked, and he told me about, he was from Illinois, and I told him I had worked in Illinois. And anyway, we got to talking, and he sat there, and he'd sort it, and I'd sort it, and we just, talk about our families.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him about your pa and your mom, and after he got up and he left, I thought, well, is he ever going to come back? It'd been about 30 minutes, he left.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, what's he going to do the rest of the day? This one guy, he come over and he said, do you know, Gladys, who you just was talking to? I said, well, I guess it's somebody hard to help me. He said, no. He said, that's your plant manager. Is who you was talking
Oh,
to.
wow.
Well, see, I had no idea.
Uh-huh.
And I could have said the wrong thing, got fired. Well, my boss that was over me, he come back in about an hour, and he said, Gladys, I got some news to tell you. And I thought, oh my, what was it? He said, Mr. Anderson said to inform you that you have a job here as long as you want it. Don't ever worry about getting fired.
Wow.
And I never did.
So that was a good relief for you.
Yeah. Yeah, if I had been one that had used foul language or talked about those guys out there that I work with, I would have went out the door.
Absolutely. So you were the only female working for about a year, you said?
Yeah.
So those men respected you?
Oh, yes. Yes, I was like a sister to them. They'd come and tell me little old things that happened, and they'd come and tell me little old jokes and stuff. And then when they bought in some new machines, and this new machine would come in, it had like a hopper for a rubber washer, and then one for a metal washer, and then another hopper for the fasteners to come down. And then it was a machine in front there with the spaces all in it for me to slide those in as they come around. And then it would tap together, go back, and the assembly line that was bringing the screws down would go into that. And then they would shoot out another hopper, and that thing would fill up. Then I had to sort them, make sure that they was clamped together and go into pans. And you had to do, you didn't have a certain number to do each day, but each pan had to stack up. You'd have 4 to 6 pans a day, completely full with fasteners that you done. And that was when you done it by hand. Then later on, they decided they wanted more production, so they bought 2 of them in. They set them up to run automatically. This other was manual-fed that you did. But the ones that was automatic, you had to run back and forth. You had 6 of them to wash all day long and make sure they stayed full, make sure they was clamping them together, because these screws would go into metal buildings to fasten them, and that washer was to keep them from leaking when they went in there. And they had a fastener on the end of them that locked them. So we would do we had to have about 6 pans under each machine when we got ready to leave. And they'd weigh up your work to see how much you'd done each day. It wasn't piecework, but they kept up with what you did to make sure you was working all the time. And then they decided to bring in a capper, and that's a punch press thing. And I was put on that first. Well, this big hopper, you put the screws in, and it fed down the line, and the screw would go around in there, and then a metal cap would come down on it, and it would punch it down and shoot it out of the machine. And whenever that thing was jammed up, it was a mess, and you better not put your finger down because you would get it cut off. So women have worked in dangerous jobs.
Yes, it sounds like it.
And the woman that took it over when I quit in 1979 to move to Columbia, she got her finger cut off on that same machine.
Wow.
So
in this factory work, you said you started in the factories when you were 18. Did you have to be 18 to work in the factories?
Yeah.
You had to be 18?
Uh-huh.
Were these factory jobs primarily women, or?
Well, no. Oh, yeah, and I worked at Western Electric. I didn't tell you about that. I worked it was an assembly job. Also, you had a clamp, and you had another a little thing that went inside the clamp. I forgot what it was called. And then you'd pull it through another piece through. And you had to put so many in a box. You laid so many this way and so many that way. But that was a group effort there. And I worked there about 6 months, I guess it was. And they had a big layoff during that time. But I got called. I moved to Russellville. That's when we moved to Russellville. And I got called back to work there. But of course, I was living in Kentucky. If they'd had a plant anywhere in Kentucky, they could have sent me there because I was on layoff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I got my job at ITW. Was during that time too. So I wouldn't have left ITW.
Mm-hmm.
But I've worked quite a few industrial jobs, and I know the women, they worked just as hard as the men did. And they paid you on a scale. The women made less money than the men did because they claim your job wasn't as high a risk of getting injured as the men's was.
Really?
Yeah.
What were the working conditions like in the factories?
In the factories. Some factories I worked in had air conditions, and some didn't. But now, ITW did have air conditions, but you'd get a lot of heat because they had a heating facility where they baked the screws,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where my brother worked at. And dip and bake, they called it. And it would get pretty hot, and most of the time we was back there close to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that.
Did the Civil Rights Act in 1964 that outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin have any effect on working women?
I never seen that much. I don't of that discrimination because when I worked in the factories, they were all different nationalities and color that worked in Illinois and also at Russellville. And I never seen that. Now, if it's happened since, I was working.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was happy as they could be, and they just wanted to work and go home and see their families and enjoy themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And as most of the time, of course, you was going to have just a few that every once in a while would get dissatisfied about things.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as anybody being discriminated against, no. I had one lady, and I don't know where she come from or why she come there. That might have been during that time. And she asked me, was I discriminated against, and was I satisfied that I didn't get this or that? And I told them no. I had what I wanted, and I was satisfied with what I was doing. So I don't know, and I reckon I was the only woman they talked to. I never did see the other women there on the line, Lee.
Mm-hmm.
I guess because maybe they might have promoted somebody and they thought I would have had the job or what.
Mm-hmm.
And I told them, I said, no. I said, I'm treated fine. I had no problem with what I did. I worked enough overtime. I worked 58 hours a week. I worked 10 hours all week long and then 8 hours on Saturday. And I done that most of the time I was working there. And then we got our vacation time whenever we wanted it. We put in for it. And so I never had any problems. And your grandpa, he worked in factories and he worked where mostly all women was at. And I never heard him say anything about any women, being discriminated against, whether they was white or whether they were black or Spanish or what.
Mm-hmm.
I never heard him say anything about it.
So you enjoyed doing the work you had to do in the factories?
Oh, yeah.
You enjoyed it?
Yeah, it was fun. I hope that our new president brings some of those jobs back to let you young people see what you missed. Because it is interesting.
Uh-huh.
You know, you go and you buy something, and most of it's made overseas. You
Mm-hmm.
don't realize the work that's involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
In 1971, that's whenever Nixon froze your wages. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
well, I know most people wasn't happy about it. They didn't, as far as I know, there wasn't any riots or anything like that. They just, grumbled among themselves
Uh-huh.
about it. It
What
wasn't
does
like
what
that.
does freezing your wages actually mean?
It means that you don't get your, like most people say they got 25 cents an hour raise.
Mm-hmm.
If you do good work, and most people did, and they got to raise it every year at the end of the year or sometime during the year. And he froze that where you couldn't get those raises. The factories couldn't give them to you. Now, why, I don't know, but it was done. And I don't remember exactly how long it well, I guess till he got impeached. Well, he didn't get impeached. I mean, he stepped down. And the way I look at it now, he didn't do anything more than what somebody else has done that's got by with it,
Mm-hmm.
with what's going on now. He done the right thing, though. He stepped down.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't try to cover it up and stuff.
So how did this waste freeze affect you?
That was, I think, the only time I got laid off at ITW was during that time.
Really?
Uh-huh. I was laid off, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks. And your pa, he got laid off from his work, Emerson, for 2 or 3 weeks during that time. That's about the only time that either one of us got laid off.
And you said you don't recall anybody going on strikes or anything?
No, not that I recall. Not around where I was working. It didn't happen.
And at what age did you quit working in the factories?
I was about 52 years old, I guess, when I quit Oshkosh Sewing Factory. I worked there, and of course, everyone around here knows that Oshkosh was primary women's jobs.
Mm-hmm.
They had the men in the cutting room and things like that. I don't know exactly what all the men done, but then they put some on the machines too in Oshkosh. It wasn't that many on the machines that I recall. They did most of the lifting and the bun. We had like bundle boys. Matter of fact, Harrison Moss, your shearer, he was my bundle boy when I worked at Oshkosh.
Really?
Yeah, me and Harrison are good friends. Yeah, we used to tease him. He always had this curly hair, and we'd tease him about his curly hair and his hair. And he did that for a long time. And then I guess he got the job where he got down at the bulk plant and left.
Mm-hmm.
When they started laying off and taking the jobs to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
That was when I started at Lindsay. I worked in the sewing factories until 1997 or 96. 96 and 97.
Whenever you first started working in the factories, the work that you've been telling me about seems like really hard labor. What was it like transitioning from that to the sewing factory? Or was it both hard? Or
Both was hard, but, well, I liked the assembly part of manufacturing that I did. But when I come to the sewing factory, I wasn't all that happy on the sewing machine, which I did, I always sewed at home.
Mm-hmm.
But it was hard. It was difficult. It was different, learning a different way of doing things. But I caught on. I stayed 13 years in the sewing factory. So it was interesting. Now that's something else I would like to see come back. It's Oshkosh to come back,
Mm-hmm.
because so many families lost their main income when Oshkosh left and was taken to Mexico. Honduras is where they went, because I'll have to give Dennis Selby credit. He called all of us in and he told us, he said, the Oshkosh will survive with us or they will survive without us. And he said that they was going to start taking some of the things to Honduras. And I told your mama then, I said, we're gone. When they started sending people to train those people down there,
Mm-hmm.
I said, they're going because they can make the product cheaper there than they can here. And our jobs is gone. I said, you better start looking for something else. And that's when I started looking for a job and got mine at Lindsay. So it was a big change both ways. That was another big change in my life. I had cooked at home, and when I went, they started me out making pizzas. And of course, then I had to cook them and then help serve them on the short line there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I had to go in at 10 o'clock. And then I didn't get off till 7 o'clock, around 7 o'clock, because we had to make sure all the silverware was rolled when we got through.
Mm-hmm.
But I started out, I think Jeff had me make 60 pizzas.
Goodness.
When school would start out,
Uh-huh.
yeah, 60 people, pizzas. Half of them had to be with pepperoni and cheese, and the other one had to be just plain cheese.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way we started out.
So, going back to the factory work, what did your hours usually consist of?
Well, it depended mostly on what shift I worked at. Most of the time, I'm thinking I went in at 6 in the morning and got off like at 3:30 in the afternoon, because they take your lunchtime out. You don't get paid for your lunchtime.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd get two 15-minute breaks. And I know ITW was the same way. You got two 15-minute breaks, and then you got 30 minutes for lunch. Of course, if your machines was down, you had time to go get you a cup of coffee or something like that. They had machines instead of going out to eat, because, like I said, the restaurants, I guess we was 3 miles out at ITW from town. And they only had like 1 or 2 little old restaurants that you could get something. So they had these machines all inside, or you take your lunch one.
Mm-hmm.
Now in Illinois, they had trucks that come by that had hot food on it. You could go out there and get something to eat. But most of the time, of course, I never did eat a whole lot at one time. I would take me a sandwich, or I'd take a package of nabs or a piece of fruit and a drink and get through.
How was your transportation? How did you get to work? Did you have a vehicle? Or?
Yeah, I would take your pa to work, or he would come home at lunch, because he lived right close there, and or I would ride with someone. I rode with my sister-in-law a lot, It was so funny. It come a big snow in Chicago, and you remember Aunt Helen.
Mm-hmm.
She had a little Volkswagen. Well, there was 4 of us in that little Volkswagen, and the snow was like, I don't know how high, so many inches high.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it was high enough that the little old Volkswagen just barely could get. If we could get it in the tracks where somebody else had went, we could go.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd get out there and we would push that little old Volkswagen out and get it in the tracks. Then we'd all get in and ride to work. It was so funny, though. I told him, I said, Lord have mercy, what if we all slip and fall out here? And just about the time I said that, this woman's feet went out from under her, and boy, she went flying. But we had so much fun, going back and work like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved to an apartment where I could walk to work. And I would walk back and, well, your pa would take me of a morning, and then in the afternoon when he was at work,
Mm-hmm.
I would walk home. It wasn't that far. It didn't take me it was about 3 blocks, I guess, from where we lived at.
Mm-hmm.
We had a nice apartment there, and it was nine apartments in where we lived at.
What was rent like?
I think we paid $125 a month for rent. Of course, that was high during that time.
What was an hourly wage like for you?
I think maybe $1.35, something like that.
$1.35 is what you were making an hour?
An hour, yeah.
So most people think that women in the 60s and 70s that were known for being a housewife and letting the husband bring in the income. Do you think, is this true for most women?
Not the ones that I know.
No, because you did say that you worked while you were married, and you all both worked to supplement the income.
The ones that didn't work babysat that I know. Ones that stayed home, like your Aunt Jewel. She kept your mom, and she babysat, And we paid her every week. And most of them that I know worked. Wasn't very many women. They would work one shift and their husband worked another one. Because the wages was low, but everything was good. It's better than it is now.
Mm-hmm. So you said that some women would work like a first shift and then their husband would work a second shift.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that was difficult on marriages?
It wasn't on ours, but it could have affected some that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
Because your pa and me have been married for, in May, it'll be 54 years.
Wow. Why do you think that most women worked?
To help make it easier on their husband so he don't have to work.
So you think most women worked for the income?
Yeah.
Because I know in today's society, a lot of women work just to keep themselves busy. But that wasn't true for women back in your age.
No. Well, if you wanted to stay home, you could. And if you wanted to get out and maybe, have a little bit more, and like I wanted your mom to have different things that I didn't have when I was growing up. I had what I needed and everything, but things had changed from the time I was little till the time that your mom was little. And we had to pay for her to go to kindergarten. And if anything different, sometimes you had to buy their little supplies at school, which now they're free.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I just wanted her to have different things when she was growing up than what I had. I wanted to give her the best that I could.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way your pa was. And also, whenever we moved up here, well, I went to work so she could go through high school and have a car to drive, and I paid her to help to teach her how to do housework. I paid her to clean my house when I was working, and it really helped me. I gave her so much out of each check. I paid her, a little bit to dust for me and do odds and ends. And that's how you know how your mom's house is. That's how she learned how to take care of her house.
I know you only had one child. Do you think if you would have had more children that you would have had to work a better paying job or worked more than one job?
No, I don't think so. But a lot of people had 2 and 3 children. They did that. But, it makes a difference in what you do.
So you would say that most women worked to supplement the income?
Yeah, and I think that's true today. Because with your health insurance and all that's going on now, and your groceries has really gone out, that women need to work if they're going to provide for their family right. Because I know myself, I don't see how one paycheck now could keep a family going. Not if they want to take them out to eat and things, expensive as everything has got. It would be hard.
Well, I want to thank you for talking to me.